Building encounters in the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons isn't easy. The Dungeon Master's Guide has guidelines for how to build encounters, but the guidelines are really complicated to use and don't really give you an accurate result in the end. Xanathar's Guide to Everything has a better set of tables that can help you figure out how hard an encounter might be. They work much better than what's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but they're also pretty complicated, and they only work in certain situations. I've spent a lot of time thinking about encounter balance in D&D, and I've come to a conclusion that I think works pretty well most of the time. And it's really a balance of two different tools. One of them I call the Lazy Encounter Benchmark. The other one I call the Dials of Monster Difficulty. When you use these two things together, they give you a much better ability to understand what kind of encounter you're going to run and an ability to tune that encounter not only before you run it, but also while you're running it. The Lazy Encounter Benchmark is a way to determine whether or not an encounter may be deadly. The Lazy Encounter Benchmark starts by first determining what monsters make sense for the scene and the situation that you're running. We start with the story. What makes sense for the story? Looking at the situation, looking at where they are, looking at what's going on, what monsters make sense for this particular situation. We start with that before we do any kind of math to figure out how hard an encounter is going to be. The second step of the Lazy Encounter Benchmark is to determine whether or not we may have gone inadvertently deadly. We figure out whether or not the encounter may be deadly with the following benchmark. An encounter may be deadly if the sum total of monster challenge ratings is greater than 1/4 of the sum total of character levels, or 1/2 of character levels if the characters are above 4th level. As a quick example, let's say we have 5 4th level characters, and they're coming up against a bunch of skeletons. And let's say the number of skeletons is about 12. So 12 skeletons, each one is challenge rating 1/4. 12 skeletons has a sum total challenge rating of 3. If we look at the characters, if we have 5 4th level characters, that's a total of 20. We divide that by 4, and it comes out to 5. So as long as we don't cross over 5, the battle's not likely to be deadly. Those 12 skeletons aren't going to be bad. If we doubled it to 24 skeletons, now we might be in trouble. We have a sum total level of 6. Ogres, on the other hand, have a challenge rating of 2. So if we have 4 ogres attacking 5 4th level characters, is that deadly? Again, we look at the sum total of monster challenge ratings. In this case, 4 ogres have a challenge rating of 8. And we compare that to the sum total of character levels divided by 4. In this case, we have 5 4th level characters. So that's 20 divided by 4, and that comes out to 5. So in this case, we're pretty sure that 4 ogres are going to be deadly. If we don't want it to be deadly, we might cut it down to 2 ogres, maybe 3. 3 is going to be pretty hard. That's still over the deadly benchmark. Probably they'll be able to do it, but it's going to be close. So that's one side. That's one of the tools that we have available to us, the Lazy Encounter Benchmark, how to quickly and easily determine whether or not an encounter may be deadly. The second one are the Dials of Monster Difficulty. There are 4 dials of monster difficulty that we can consider. 1, the number of monsters. 2, the hit points of those monsters. 3, the amount of damage those monsters inflict. And 4, the number of attacks that they have. All 4 of those things are dials that we can change either before an encounter or during an encounter. First, we can make a battle significantly more difficult by adding more monsters. We can also make it significantly less difficult by removing more monsters. Adding and removing monsters is the easiest way to increase or decrease the difficulty of an encounter. Every monster has a listed average amount of hit points, but if you look at the hit die value, the amount of hit points that any monster can have can actually fluctuate quite a bit. You can actually have monsters that are as low as the minimum number rolled on those hit dice, or as high as the maximum number rolled on those hit dice. A lazier technique is to either just reduce the hit points to whatever you want them to be, or double the hit points if you want a monster to be particularly strong. So you don't really have to stay that close to the hit points that are listed in the average. You can go ahead and either halve it or double it if you want a monster to be significantly easier or significantly harder. So every monster has an average amount of damage listed for their attacks. Again, just like with hit points, we can either decrease that amount or increase it by increasing the value or decreasing the value. If we want to add some damage, we can also throw on some extra dice or some extra damage on top of it. You can use in-story ways to increase the damage. Perhaps with the ogre, when he's swinging his club, sets it on fire and does an additional 2d6 fire damage. Perhaps your vampire spawn is infused with necrotic energy and inflicts 4d6 extra necrotic damage on attacks. So there's a lot of ways to add elemental damage to a monster to really boost up the amount of damage that it does. Now, another easy trick is to simply give it more attacks. If a monster already has 2 attacks, maybe it gains a third. If it only has 1, maybe it gets 2. So with these two tools, the lazy encounter benchmark and the dials of monster difficulty, you have a lot of control over exactly how a battle may play out when you run it during the game. The key is not to make sure that it runs exactly a certain way or to focus on just the challenge that you're providing to the characters or really to the players. The idea is to make sure that you're focused on the story, that the monsters make sense for what's going on in the story, that they have story reasons to do what they're doing and for the amount of monsters that are there and the type of monsters that are there. And if you decide to increase or decrease the amount of damage, you can do so by adding in story-based elements that do so, like an unholy altar that's giving everybody extra necrotic damage, or a flaming cauldron that everybody's drawing their weapons from that add extra fire damage. So think about the story reasons why things are taking place before you just worry about the challenge. But between these two tools, you have a lot of control over the kinds of battles that you run, and thus you're able to tell better stories that you and your players can enjoy around your table. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, there are 4 things that you can do to help me out. 1, you can subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. 2, you can subscribe to my channel on YouTube. 3, you can become a patron of Sly Flourish by going to patreon.com/slyflourish and signing up. Or 4, you can pick up my book, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day.